The email arrived at 2:30 a.m. I felt the chill before I even read the words. The cabin lights dimmed above me while the city disappeared under the clouds. Subject line termination notice. Effective immediately. I blinked once, twice. But the message stayed the same. My name, my title, and the sentence that erased everything. Your employment with Orion Systems has been terminated. No call, no explanation. Just this cold line like a knife slipped between my ribs. I looked around. Everyone else slept in their pods, faces soft under thin blankets. I sat alone with the glow of my laptop in a hush louder than any scream. 9 years, 3 continents, hundreds of nights like this one, working while the world rested. A billion-dollar deal closed hours ago, built on my trust, my voice, my persistence. And now, nothing. They believed cutting me midair would end my story. They thought deleting my access would erase who I was. But they were wrong. This was only the beginning. I wasn't new to betrayal. When I joined Orion 9 years ago, we were just a small team with bigger dreams than resources. I was 28 and I thought working harder than anyone else would be enough. I became the fixer, the one they called when contracts collapsed or when executives panicked in boardrooms. I spoke 4 languages. I stayed up all night reworking proposals. I flew across time zones without complaint. Every time I saved them, I thought it meant I was earning my place. That if I kept proving my worth, someone would finally say it out loud. You belong here. You deserve more. But promotions never came. They always said I was too direct, too strong, too visible. When recognition did appear, it slipped away again, given to quieter voices who never risked what I did. I kept telling myself it didn't matter, that results would protect me. But even after 9 years, I was just another name they could erase when it was convenient. A year ago, I watched Clara Vale nearly destroy a major client relationship. She leaked confidential data during a live demo, a mistake that could have cost us everything. Legal panicked. Marketing froze. Richard called me at midnight, his voice low and controlled, as if this was just a routine inconvenience. "Clean it up," he said. She didn't know any better. I didn't argue. I spent 48 hours rewriting statements, making calls, and burying the story before it reached the press. When it was over, no one thanked me. Clara never even apologized. Everyone moved on like nothing happened. I told myself it was loyalty. That protecting the company meant protecting everyone in it, even the CEO's daughter. But something settled in me, heavy and bitter. The knowledge that loyalty in their world was a one-way transaction. I kept telling myself it didn't matter as long as I kept winning. But some debts never stay quiet. 3 weeks before that flight, I opened the shared drive to finalize my proposal for the Trident deal. I had spent months refining every chart and every sentence until it was precise. But when the file loaded, I saw her name, author Clara Vale. At first, I thought it was a system glitch. I checked the version history and felt my chest tighten. She had made small edits, changed bullet points, rearranged a few slides, but everything else was mine. She didn't even have the decency to tell me she was taking credit. I stared at the screen while the city outside my window blurred into soft lights. If I spoke up, they'd call me territorial. They'd say I was emotional. That word always surfaced when a woman refused to be invisible. So I closed the file. I said nothing. But in that silence, something cracked that would never heal the same way. After that night, the silence around me grew thicker. A week later, Richard promised my promotion was in final review. Then the topic disappeared from every conversation. I kept working because that's what I knew how to do. 3 cities waited. 3 contracts no one else could close. Tokyo, London, Sao Paulo. I convinced myself the work would speak louder than politics. That if I just proved my value again, they couldn't deny it forever. But deep down, the truth was already clear. They didn't want to reward me. They wanted to contain me, to keep me close enough to solve their problems, but never close enough to threaten their comfort. I told myself this time would be different, but a part of me no longer believed that. I could feel the edges of my faith starting to slip away piece by piece. In Tokyo, the tension was immediate. Kenji Sato didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You promised security," he said. "So do your competitors." "Why should I believe you?" I didn't flinch. I opened my laptop and walked him through the custom encryption models I'd built with our engineers. Line by line, I explained how every protocol worked. He listened without nodding, without giving me any sign that I was reaching him. When I finished, he closed the folder and looked me straight in the eye. "I see why they send you," he said quietly. "The others speak. You understand? It should have felt like a win." But all I felt was an old hollow ache. Because no matter how many times I proved myself, it never changed what happened when I returned home. They would still pretend I was temporary, replaceable, forgettable. In London, the stakes felt different. Eurocom's legal team didn't tolerate sloppy contracts. I had warned Orion months ago about compliance gaps in our agreement. They ignored me like they always did. So that night, I sat in a rented flat with cold tea and rewrote the entire contract alone. Clause by clause, I fixed what they wouldn't. The next morning, I handed the new draft across the polished table. Diana Ellis raised an eyebrow as she read the first page. "This isn't your company's standard," she said. "It's the version that works," I replied. Her mouth twitched, almost smiling. "You should be sitting on this side of the table." Her voice was calm, but it landed like a truth I'd been refusing to hear. I had been acting like Orion owned me, but every success was mine, and one day I would stop giving it away. By the time I landed in Sao Paulo, I was running on caffeine and muscle memory. This was the final leg. Santiago Ruiz was waiting with a folder of questions. He didn't smile. "What guarantees can you give me?" he asked. "I trust you. I don't trust Orion." I didn't pretend to be surprised. I answered every question calmly, outlining risk plans and long-term support. When I held firm on the numbers, he leaned back and studied my face for a long moment. "If this falls apart later," he said, "it won't be because of you." His words felt heavier than any contract. I took a breath and lowered my voice. "If there were a way to do this without the noise, would you take it?" He didn't hesitate. You know my answer. I knew then something had shifted that couldn't be undone. I left that meeting feeling both exhausted and electric. 3 clients, 3 conversations that didn't belong to Orion anymore. When I reached my hotel room, I didn't unpack. I pulled out the matte black laptop no one knew about. Travant. The word glowed on the screen, calm and certain. It wasn't just an exit plan, it was a future I had already started. 6 months of quiet preparation. 6 months of gathering the people who still believed in doing things the right way. Because power doesn't care about loyalty, it only respects leverage. And for the first time, I had both. I closed the laptop and sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the old fear fade. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready. The night before my return flight, I watched Sao Paulo's lights scatter across the dark. I thought about Clara's promotion. The gala where I stood in her shadow holding a glass of champagne I never tasted. Richard's voice calling her the future as if I had never existed. All the times I stayed silent to keep the peace, to stay employed, to be seen as reasonable. I felt no rage now, only clarity. They never planned to honor what I built. They planned to use it until they didn't need me. I closed my eyes and let that truth settle deep and final. When the sun rose, I would get on the plane, but I wouldn't be returning as the same woman who left. They thought I was theirs to discard. They had no idea I had already chosen myself. When the plane lifted into the darkness, I waited for relief. The Trident deal was done. The work was complete, but all I felt was a cold emptiness spreading through my chest. I opened my laptop one last time to check the final contract summary. Everything was in order, until the screen flickered. Slack disconnected. Outlook vanished. Access denied. My stomach turned as an email loaded. Termination notice, effective immediately. No signature, no explanation. Just that same sterile line delivered mid-air like an execution. I looked around. Everyone else slept peacefully under thin blankets. I was alone in the quiet roar of the engines holding evidence of my erasure. They didn't wait for me to land. They didn't have the decency to look me in the eye. This was how they ended 9 years. With a single click, they made me disappear. Or so they thought. For a long moment, I couldn't move. I stared at the laptop screen waiting for something to change. Nothing did. The message stayed final and cold. They believed cutting my access would strip me of everything. They thought if they locked me out, I would have nothing left to stand on. They never understood that the real leverage wasn't on their servers. It was in my hands. I reached under the seat and pulled out the matte black laptop, the one that never touched Orion systems, the one they couldn't erase. When I opened it, my heartbeat slowed. Every file was there, the contracts, the notes, the conversations. I felt something steady return to me, not anger, not panic, resolve. They fired me like I was disposable. They forgot I was the only reason those clients were still there. I watched the encrypted folders load one by one. Every contract version, every clause I had rewritten alone in rented rooms. All the proof of the work they never valued. I took a slow breath as the reality settled in my bones. They thought this was the end of my story. They didn't see it was only the start of theirs unraveling. I opened a blank document and placed my hands on the keys. 3 words came easily. The door is open. I closed the lid and leaned back. Outside, the sky was endless and black. Inside, I felt lighter than I had in years, because for the first time I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was ready to claim it. When dawn broke over the ocean, I knew the old life was over. But I didn't mourn it. I had already chosen something better. When I landed, nothing looked different. The same skyline, the same crowded terminals, but I knew everything had changed. I didn't go home. I booked a small hotel room I'd use between flights. No one asked questions when I checked in. I set my bag down and opened the black laptop again. 3 draft emails waited. 1 to Kenji, 1 to Diana, 1 to Santiago. I read each line carefully. There were no threats, no demands, just a simple invitation to choose something different. Something better. I hesitated only once before pressing send. Then I closed my eyes and felt the tension leave my body. They thought they had shut every door, but some doors only open when you stop waiting for permission. I was done waiting. The next morning, I sat by the window with coffee I didn't drink. Outside, the city moved on as if nothing had shifted. But in my quiet room, everything was in motion. No calls from Orion, no apologies, just silence. It felt clean. By noon, all 3 clients logged into Travant's secure portal. No press release, no headlines, just 3 decisions that spoke louder than any announcement. They hadn't chosen me out of pity. They had chosen trust over politics. I refreshed the dashboard once more, watching the confirmation icons appear. Each one was a quiet promise, the end of one story, the beginning of another. For the first time, I wasn't holding my breath, waiting to be recognized. I was building something that needed no permission to exist. By afternoon, Orion started calling. Richard tried Kenji first. No answer. Then Diana. Her assistant told him she was unavailable for Orion. He called Santiago's office next. The response was polite but final. Santiago no longer took calls from them. I imagined the panic spreading through Orion's glass halls. They thought firing me would be clean, that the clients would stay out of habit. They never understood what trust really means. It isn't a line in a contract. It's built in quiet rooms and late nights when no one else shows up. I watched the city fade into dusk. While they drafted statements, I sat in the calm. I didn't need to defend myself. The results were already speaking, and this time, I wasn't the one left behind. By evening, Maya called me from a quiet corner of Orion's legal floor. "They're panicking," she whispered. Clara locked herself in a conference room. "Richard is blaming everyone but himself." Her voice trembled between shock and something close to relief. I didn't feel triumphant, just steady. "They're trying to draft a counter-narrative," she said. "Press statements damage control all of it." I closed my eyes and let her words drift over me. They were spending all their energy patching a ship already sinking. While they wrote excuses, I was building something clean, something no headline could distort. "Maya," I said, "you don't have to stay there anymore." She was quiet for a long second. "I know," she said softly. When we hung up, I didn't feel like celebrating. I felt like breathing again, and it was enough. The next morning, Orion released a statement to every major outlet. They called it a strategic realignment. No mention of me, no acknowledgement of the deals I had closed alone. They still believed they could control the story if they used enough corporate language. I didn't answer the calls that followed. Reporters wanted a comment. Analysts wanted to know how Travant existed under their radar. I said nothing. Because this wasn't about proving my side anymore. The truth didn't need me to shout. It was unfolding on its own. Clients were choosing, and each silent decision was more powerful than any statement Orion could publish. I watched the headlines roll by without flinching. They thought ignoring me would make me disappear, but it only made what I built impossible to look away from. By noon, my phone filled with messages I hadn't expected. Kenji sent a simple note. "We trust you. No need to explain." Santiago forwarded a signed copy of the new agreement. Diana replied with 3 words that felt like a quiet victory. "Consider it done." I let the screen go dark and sat back in the chair. 9 years of running toward approval that never came. 9 years of working twice as hard to be seen as worthy. All it took was one clean break to remember I didn't need any of them to validate me. Travant wasn't revenge. It was the answer to every closed door and every stolen credit line. Outside the window, the city shimmered in the afternoon light. I didn't feel lost anymore. I felt exactly where I was supposed to be. In the afternoon, Leo walked into my hotel room carrying a folder and 2 coffees. "They're calling it the silent takeover," he said, setting everything on the table. I didn't smile. I wasn't interested in headlines. We spread the contracts out between us, checking every detail again. The agreements were clean, signed, uncontested. "They still think you did this to punish them," he said quietly. I shook my head. "No," I said. "I did this to remember who I was before they convinced me I needed their permission." For a while, neither of us spoke. The quiet felt better than any celebration. When Leo finally left, I stayed by the window and watched the sky darken. This wasn't an ending. It was the first day of something that would last. By evening, the first big headlines started spreading. The silent takeover, how Travant outmaneuvered Orion. Analysts speculated about how we built an entire operation unnoticed. They called it unprecedented. I knew better. It wasn't magic. It was every late night I spent working while they slept, every risk I took when they chose safety, every time I told myself to wait even when I deserved more, and finally the decision to stop waiting. I scrolled past the articles without pausing. This wasn't the recognition I'd once craved. It was proof that you can build something lasting when you stop asking for permission. At midnight, I closed the laptop and looked out over the city. For the first time in years, I felt unburdened, like I'd finally stepped out of someone else's shadow and into my own light. That night, I finally slept. No alarm set, no flights waiting, no titles to chase. When I woke before sunrise, the quiet felt clean, almost holy. I brewed coffee I actually wanted and sat by the window as the sky turned pale gold. Somewhere across the city, Richard and Clara were scrambling to hold together what they had taken for granted. I didn't think about them. I thought about the clients who had believed in me, not my title. About the team who stayed when everything else fell apart. I thought about the woman I was 9 years ago, stepping into Orion's lobby, believing hard work would be enough. And I thought about who I had become the moment I stopped waiting for someone to hand me a place at the table. I had built my own. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed with a short message from Santiago. "We're ready when you are." Just 5 words. But they felt heavier than any title Orion ever dangled in front of me. I read the message twice, letting it settle in my chest. This wasn't about contracts anymore. It was about trust. The kind you can't manufacture with branding or press releases. I opened Travant's dashboard and watched the live updates roll in. 3 partnerships. 3 companies choosing something better without hesitation. No more politics. No more borrowed credibility. Just clean agreements and a promise to build together. I typed my reply slowly, feeling every word. Let's begin. When I hit send, the last trace of doubt disappeared. I didn't need to prove anything to Orion. I was finally answering to myself. Around noon, Richard tried one last move. A voicemail. His voice was calm, almost rehearsed. "Was this personal?" he asked. I didn't need to hear the rest. I already knew the question behind the question. He wanted me to say this was just business, that I hadn't meant to disrupt everything they thought was secure, but that would have been a lie. Of course it was personal. It was professional, too. It was everything they pretended didn't matter. I deleted the message without listening to another second, because no explanation would make him understand. I hadn't set out to destroy anything. I had simply refused to keep building for people who never planned to see me. And when you stop giving your labor to those who erase you, the collapse is inevitable. Later that day, I walked into Travant's new office for the first time. Sunlight poured across polished floors and tall windows. No heavy doors, no surveillance cameras, no walls covered in names that weren't mine. On the far wall hung a simple plaque in brushed steel. Travant. Founded by Evelyn Shaw. I stood there longer than I meant to, reading each word, remembering every late night when I thought I was building something that belonged to me. Every morning I woke up believing hard work could erase bias. I rested my hand against the plaque and felt my throat tighten. No one could take this away. No rebranding or press release could rewrite how it started. For the first time, I didn't have to shrink to fit someone else's comfort. I could stand here without apology, without permission. I sat at the head of the conference table, but it didn't feel like a throne. It felt like balance. Maya sat across from me, reviewing the final implementation plan. Leo joined by video, grinning as he walked through the financial projections. Diana sent a message. "The future looks brighter with you leading it." I read her words twice, feeling something loosen in my chest. All those years I spent trying to convince people I was enough. All the times I stayed silent, thinking patience would be rewarded. This was what happened when you stop waiting. I looked around the room, seeing not just a team, but a group of people who knew exactly what it felt like to be overlooked. People who had chosen something different. Someone different. For the first time, I believed them when they said I belonged here. In the afternoon, Clara resigned. No statement, no farewell emails, just a line buried in a trade bulletin. "Clara Vale has stepped down effective immediately." I read it once, then closed the tab. No part of me needed her downfall to feel whole. Some endings don't need to be announced. They just arrive quiet and undeniable. I thought I might feel vindicated, but all I felt was relief. Relief that I no longer had to pretend any of them were allies. Relief that I'd finally stopped giving them the power to define me. I looked up from my laptop, the sun falling in long lines across the floor. This wasn't the triumph I once imagined. It was something quieter, more permanent. It was freedom. An hour later, another alert appeared on my phone. Richard had been removed from Orion's board. Unanimous vote, no press conference, no interviews, just a quiet footnote in the same newsletters that once celebrated him. I didn't feel satisfaction watching their names disappear, because this had never been about revenge. It was about reclamation, taking back the work they tried to bury under someone else's credit, reclaiming the years I spent thinking invisibility was the price of ambition. As the sun dipped below the skyline, I sat back and exhaled. Nothing about this was loud. No shouting, no spectacle, only a slow, deliberate shift in gravity. The people who once defined my limits were simply gone, and I was still here. The next morning, I arrived at Travant early. The office was quiet, filled with soft light that made everything look new. I walked the perimeter alone, fingertips grazing the glass walls and the warm wood tables. This was what I had wanted all along, a place where no one had to pretend to be smaller to stay, where contribution was never hidden behind someone else's title. I stopped in front of the small lounge area overlooking the river. I could almost see the younger version of myself there, tired and hopeful, still believing I needed permission to matter. I wished I could tell her how wrong she was, how none of those gatekeepers would last, how everything she built would still be standing long after their names were forgotten. I smiled at the thought. Then I turned back to the conference room. Work waited, but for the first time it felt like mine. Later that night, I stepped onto the terrace alone. The city pulsed below me, alive and indifferent. I thought about Richard's voicemail again. Was this personal? He would never understand the answer. It wasn't only personal, it was necessary. I took a slow breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs. This was what it felt like to be free of their approval, to know I had built something that didn't require permission. Maya joined me quietly, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "Do you think they'll recover?" she asked. "Maybe," I said, "but it won't be the same. Because once you see how fragile the old structures are, you can't pretend anymore. You either build something stronger or you fade." I had chosen to build. By sunrise, Travant's inbox overflowed. Partnership requests, speaking invitations, investors wanting meetings. I read each message carefully, feeling no rush. This time I wouldn't say yes to every offer. I would protect what we'd created from the same compromises that hollowed Orion. Leo walked in carrying fresh reports. "You ready to pick your next steps?" he asked. I nodded. "We do this slow. We do it right." He smiled, understanding. We didn't need to be the biggest overnight. We just needed to be the most trusted. Outside the window, the city brightened by degrees. I thought about the first morning I walked into Orion full of belief. Today felt nothing like that. It was better, because this time I knew exactly who I was. Mid-morning, a courier delivered a small box. No return address. Inside was my old nameplate, the one that used to sit on my desk at Orion. No note, no explanation. I held it in my hands for a long moment, 9 years condensed into a piece of plastic and metal. Once this would have broken me. Now it felt irrelevant, a reminder of who I used to be. I set it on the shelf behind my desk, not as a trophy, not as a wound, just as proof that I had survived it. Maya peeked in. Everything okay? Better than okay, I said, because nothing they sent back could diminish what I'd claimed for myself. I was done carrying their stories. In the afternoon, we finalized the contracts. 3 signatures, 3 commitments to a future no one at Orion could touch. I read every page, carefully remembering all the nights I had rewritten these same agreements alone. Diana's legal team confirmed the last details. Santiago called with final approvals. Kenji sent a message that simply said, "We trust you. Let's go." I closed the files and felt the last pieces lock into place. This was what power looked like when it wasn't borrowed. Not a performance, not an illusion, just steady, earned authority. I looked up at the team gathered around the table. Everyone here had been underestimated at some point. Now they were building something that couldn't be erased. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. This was our moment. At dusk, we gathered in the main conference room. No speeches, no champagne, just quiet recognition of what we'd built. Maya raised her cup. To the work, she said simply. We clinked glasses, no need for anything louder. I thought about all the moments I'd almost walked away, all the times I convinced myself it was safer to stay invisible. It wasn't. It had only delayed this clarity, this freedom. I looked at the faces around the table, people who refused to be small even when the cost was high, people who showed up when it mattered. I lifted my cup back to them. To never disappearing again, I said, and for the first time the words felt true. That night I stayed late in the office alone. I walked the halls one more time, feeling the weight of everything we'd claimed, not just contracts, but dignity. I stopped by the plaque near the entrance. Travant, founded by Evelyn Shaw. I traced the letters lightly with my fingertip. For years, I'd been told to wait my turn, to be patient, to let others take credit. I wasn't angry anymore. I just felt done with pretending. Outside the city shimmered in quiet celebration. I didn't need to share, because this victory wasn't about applause. It was about knowing I'd finally built something honest, and no one could take it from me again. I turned off the lights and locked the door behind me, ready for what came next. As I walked home, I thought about Richard's last question. Was this personal? Of course it was. Personal is what happens when you spend years giving everything to something that never loved you back. Professional is refusing to do it forever. I passed the Orion building one last time. Its windows were dark, the lobby empty. For so long, I believed that place defined me. Now it felt small. I didn't need to stand there any longer. I turned away without hesitation. No regret. No curiosity about what might happen to them next, because the only story I cared about was the one I'd finally claimed as mine, and I knew exactly how it would begin. The next morning, I unlocked Travant's front door at sunrise. Light spilled across the floor, catching the edge of my desk. I set down my bag and looked around the space that was finally mine. No borrowed authority, no hidden credits, just clean air and possibility. I opened my laptop and pulled up the day's agenda, not because I had to, because I wanted to. Maya walked in a few minutes later, her smile soft. "You're early," she said. "I didn't want to miss it," I replied. She didn't ask what I meant. She understood. I took a deep breath, feeling every inch of this moment. No one could erase it, no one could claim it, and for the first time, I didn't need anything more. If any part of this story spoke to you, if you've ever felt invisible, underestimated, or told to wait, I'd love to hear what it meant to you. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you believe in building your own place instead of waiting for permission, subscribe to this channel. There are more stories ahead, and you won't want to miss them.